Hello, everybody. Good morning or afternoon. Welcome, welcome.
I see Jenny is here, Celeste is here. And for those of you who may not know, Celeste Lear, who's in the room with us here, also has a show of her art in the next room, which is, I believe, is coming down very soon. And so you'll need to take your opportunity to see it maybe after this event. When you leave, you can hop into there and have a look at it. It's very cool stuff.
It is very beautiful, yeah. And for those of you who are interested in sort of the art or creative part of the world, Celeste has had a beautiful exhibit. Thanks to Celeste, we may have some more artists coming in soon. But on September, around the second week of September, September 10th, 11th, or 12th, that's when we'll have our new artist, Kelly Guillory, or Kay Guillory, who's going to be presenting about a new art form called Gritism.
That sounds super cool too. Well, you know what? I think it is 12:02, so I think let's go ahead and get started. Yay! Happy Wednesday, everyone. Welcome to XR Women. Always a pleasure to see you all here. I see Christine seated in her Zen pose over there, but she's got her weapons at her back. She's ready to defend us should need be, and we've got a roving troll catcher as well. But we shouldn't need that. I'm super excited today, as I was saying before, in case you didn't hear, to hear from Kaitlyn O'Connor about XR legal and regulatory pathways. And this is such an important topic for our industry that I think doesn't get enough attention. Not enough people think about laws and regulations when they are creating their XR products and experiences, but they really do need to think about them from the beginning. So I am very keen to hear what Kaitlyn will have to say. So we know that you should know that we are recording, and also people take pictures, and your name might appear above your head. There may be recordings of your voice. There are various ways in which your presence here may be captured and may be shared on social media. So be aware of that. And you can try to take some measures to disguise yourself or watch what you say if you are not comfortable with that. And we do ask that you please mute. Please take a moment right now for all of you to mute. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions later, and you can certainly unmute yourselves at that point, but it just keeps the audio nicer, and we don't have the background noise that we normally do. And now we have a diverse range of speakers from all kinds of different industry perspectives, and also from different viewpoints about things that are happening in our industry. And we ask that you respect their opinions. And if you disagree, politely ask a question at the end. And know that the opinions of our guest speakers do not necessarily reflect those of XR Women or individual XR Women leadership team members. There is a question option here that should be, if you're on your screen, at the top of the screen, that when it comes to the Q&A time, you can use that to put yourself in the queue for questions. And Jenna will be moderating that part of the event. But also take the time to connect with others. There is a convenient feature in Frame that allows you to click right next to somebody's name on their LinkedIn profile and even on any of their other social media that they have made available here. So that's a really great way to make connections, but also talk to people. Find the time, maybe stay a little bit longer afterwards. This space is open 24/7. You can return anytime you want to visit this space, to look at what's on the walls of our museum, to visit the gallery with Celeste Lear's gorgeous artwork, or just to meet up with other XR women to have a chance to get together and talk. So please take advantage of it. We've had 7 new members joining XR Women this week, including our speaker, Kaitlyn O'Connor. We're very pleased about that. And others from the US and from Argentina and Switzerland. So welcome to these new members. Are any of you who are on this list here today? If so, please do unmute yourself and take a moment to introduce yourself to the group. And if you're not, if you are new but you're not on the list, go ahead and do that as well. We want to hear from you. We want to learn who you are. Anyone here for the first time? Okay, I think that's a no. So we are going to move on. Okay, so we're here in the XR Women Museum, which you know about. Again, it's a persistent space. It's open 24/7 for you to visit and to learn more about the amazing speakers that we have. There is a research corner created by our own Sarah Barker, who is here in the space, and she features there peer-reviewed research about XR that includes at least one woman author. So this is a great way to connect with really important research on our field that is going on. And Sarah has done an amazing job in putting this together. There is a button at the top of your screen that says Go To. And in that drop-down menu, you should be able to go to the research corner. There's also a button in the foyer, in the entry hall, that you can click to take you there to the research corner. And I know Sarah is doing some more work on there to really build this out. She's very passionate about research and has put a lot of time and effort into this, and we're very grateful to her for making this resource available to our community. So thank you very much, Sarah. We really appreciate it. We already talked about the gallery, and which is just in the next room, featuring Celeste Lear's artwork for now. And Jenna is curating shows in that space, about 3 of them a year. So if you are an artist or if you know of an artist who would like to be featured there, please reach out to Jenna. Another persistent space we have is in Engage, and that is our spatial computing business showcase. You can go there. It is still open now. We had originally planned to keep it open only through the month of February, but it's still there. When you go into Engage, you go join session, and then join session by ID, and you use the code MRGPL, all uppercase. So if you haven't checked that out, the interactive booths featuring 9 XR businesses led by women there in that space, please do check it out before it's gone, because it's pretty super cool and is a great example of the stellar work being done by women in XR. Okay, our YouTube channel. If you have not already subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do so. And there we strive to post recordings of the events that we host. So if you find yourself unable to make an event, or if you have to leave early, if you get here late and you want to catch the beginning or the end, you can go to YouTube and look for them there. Now, I will note that we do not post events that are purely networking events on that space, because we want to have the opportunity for people to just have those conversations. But when we do have guest speakers, we post them on YouTube. So check it out. We also have some really awesome XR Women merch. Earlier this year, we had a contest, and some really great designers put together some new designs for our stuff there. And there's a wide range of products. When you buy something in our merch store, a little bit of that money comes back to XR Women to defray our costs, to cover, all the productivity tools that we use to bring these events to you. Our time here is all given to you out of love and a desire to move this industry forward and to support the success of women in the space. But we don't want to have to pay out of our pockets for the cost of running these events. So this is a way that you can both show your XR Women pride and help support what we do. And we now have the second edition of our XR Women enamel pins. So some of you have, and you'll see some of our community members on the screen there wearing our pins. The first edition, this is a new edition, a limited edition, and it features the dark purple with silver metal around them. They're really gorgeous pins, really well produced. And if you make a $35 donation to XR Women, you will receive one of these pins shipped to you in the USA and Canada. If you're based somewhere else and would like to get one of these pins, please talk to one of our leadership team members and we'll see what we can do. But we have to be careful with regard to the postage costs, and we'll be sending them from the US. Okay, we shared this before. The XR Today All-Stars are really terrific in that they featured some of our members there. We're very proud of that. Julie Smithson, Jennifer Rogers, Radhika Mukherjee, Amy Peck, I believe. But there was a strong gender imbalance there. It was mostly men. You can submit to be an XR Today All-Star, and we strongly encourage you to do that. That is the way we're going to get more women on that list, and you all deserve to be there. So please follow this link and submit yourself to be an XR Today All-Star. Let's get more women on that list. Okay, now this is really interesting. The Gen AI Prism infographic, which is a framework for collaborating with generative AI. This is super cool. And I don't know if we have a version of this that can be shared in the chat. And by the way, please note, if you don't know this already, if you click your mouse on the screen behind me, you'll have the option to zoom in on it and you can see it much larger. So keep that in mind when our guest presenter is up here. If there's one of her slides that you want to see more close up, you are able to do that. But this is a very helpful, this prism here for trying to make sense of the exploding explosion of AI tools that are out there and that we are using in XR and in other parts of our lives. So next week, August 14th, we're really excited to have a panel of women from Shell Games, which is a fantastic company based here in Pittsburgh, where I am. It's one of the largest independent gaming companies in the US. And it's a very good place to work consistently and one of the top places to work in Pittsburgh. They make great VR games. One is I Expect You to Die. There's a food preparation VR game. And I think it's called something like Hidden Recipes or Lost Recipes. And they also have some history experiences. Okay, and this panel will feature an audio artist, an advanced producer, an advanced designer, a senior graphics engineer, and a senior public relations manager. So we're going to hear from a broad spectrum of women who work at Shell Games. And that should be really fascinating. And then the following week, we are excited to have Debbie Deer, who is CEO of Orion Digital Inc. And she is going to be talking about diverse forces in XR and how we influence the singularity. She is a very dynamic speaker, and we're excited to have her. So that is 2 weeks from today. But today we have Kaitlyn O'Connor. So I will turn things over to Jenna to introduce Kaitlyn, and then we will let Kaitlyn take over the screen and the stage. Welcome, Kaitlyn.
Awesome. Thank you, Karen. Thank you so much. And I love that we've got a good group today, a good crowd. Today's going to be really special because we're going to be going into some of the, I like to call it the meat and potatoes of building something successful that can grow, and some of the things that we may not think about. But I love this group with all the names that I'm seeing. I'm seeing people that are actually building. So with that being said, I am so excited to introduce Kaitlyn O'Connor. Kaitlyn is a partner at a group called Nixon Gwilt Law, and she's got experience working with companies that work in digital health, telehealth, veterinary medicine, aka TelePet, which is very cute, extended reality, direct-to-consumer digital health business models, and remote care management. Kaitlyn provides legal, regulatory, and business guidance to healthcare companies across the spectrum of care. And she also has a particular passion for working with extended reality developers and delivering innovative forms of treatment to patients. I personally have seen Kaitlyn talk at a few events, for example, IDRHA. And after that, after I saw her speak, I thought she was a great, valuable speaker for our group here at XR Women. So, with that being said, I would love to invite Kaitlyn to the stage. All right, and if you can, go ahead and bring some emojis as we welcome Kaitlyn.
Thank you, Jenna. Thank you all so much. I am going to go ahead and pull up my slides. And while I do that, I just want to first say thank you to everyone. I'm really excited to be here. I attended the XR Women Awards at AWE, and that was my first time kind of experiencing the group and meeting a lot of members. And I was just so impressed by everyone that was in attendance and all of the really amazing things that the women in this group are working on. So I'm really honored to be here, and I appreciate you all allowing me to come and talk with you. I will start by saying that the legal landscape related to XR generally, not just healthcare XR, but XR generally, is vast. So I am probably not going to mention all of the various laws and regulations that you may have heard of or that you are navigating, but I am going to try to talk at least briefly about all of the ones that I think or I have seen in my practice as the most important for building a sustainable foundation for a business that can grow and succeed within the XR industry. As Jenna mentioned, I'm a partner at Nixon Gwilt, which is a healthcare innovation law firm. So my experience as an attorney is specifically within the healthcare sector of the XR industry. So that means that most of my experience and most of the questions I'll be able to answer will relate to healthcare. But a lot of the laws and regulations that I'm going to talk about are actually more broadly applicable even outside of healthcare. So even if you're not in the healthcare industry or not even thinking about entering the healthcare industry, that's okay. I hope that I will be able to still provide you with something valuable today. And if you have questions, I will still be happy to try to answer them. And if I don't know the answer, I may be able to introduce you to someone that will know the answer. So I'm just going to go ahead and dive in. If you have questions, please feel free to react with an emoji or raise your hand, drop something in the chat. I'm kind of monitoring everything, and I'm happy to stop as I go. So don't be afraid to just kind of jump in with any questions that you might have. So I will go ahead and get started. Let's see. Okay, I've already introduced myself. Quick disclaimer, like I said, I am an attorney, but this presentation itself is not legal advice. So while I will be talking about the laws and I'll be happy to answer questions, just remember that this is mostly informational, and without knowing a little bit more about your company and what you're working on, I probably won't be able to answer questions specifically, or give you specific legal advice, I should say. All right, so let's dive into the fun stuff. I have already said this to a couple of you. I know that talking about the law and regulations is not always the most exciting, but I will try to make it fun in the sense that I'm going to try to connect all of these laws and regulations that we're going to talk about to the actual practical impact and to the what it actually means for your business. So before I get into this slide that's in front of me and that hopefully you all can see, I do want to quickly get a sense of who's in the room. So I don't know what's easiest here. Maybe just drop something in the chat, or like I said, raise your hand. Who in the room is actually involved in healthcare XR? Building something within the healthcare XR industry or working in the space, using it in your practice? Anyone? Okay.
I am.
Perfect. Okay, a couple of people, several of us. Okay, awesome. Who is a researcher or in the academic field within XR? Okay. And then who else is in the room? Maybe artists? Okay, perfect. Oh, a lot of artists. Awesome. Okay, great. Okay, so that's really helpful. If you are in another category that I didn't mention, please feel free to drop that in the chat. I just like to ask that question so that as I talk about some of my slides, the information I share is hopefully relevant to most, if not all of you. Okay, so one of the threshold questions, one of the questions that's going to impact all of the laws and regulations that apply to you, whether you are an artist that is building a world for a healthcare company or for any other XR company, whether you are a healthcare provider or a founder, there are two questions that are really important to always come back to. The first is, what are your responsibilities to your customers? And the second is, what are your responsibilities to your users? So in a B2B model, business to business model, your customer and your user are probably not the same person. In healthcare, for example, your customer might be a hospital or a health system, but your users may actually be patients or the individual providers that work within that health system. A lot of times it's actually both. And what's important about that is when we think about the laws and regulations that you'll need to comply with, or that the product you're building will need to comply with, is that you're going to have different legal and regulatory responsibilities to each of those different parties. So even if your customer is a health system and their users are, or your users are providers and patients, you will have one set of responsibilities to your customer and a separate set of responsibilities to your users. So I'm going to try to address both of those, but keep that in mind as we go through the different laws and regulations. Keep coming back to who your customers actually are and who your users are. If you're direct to consumer, your customers and your users might be the same person, and that's great. That streamlines things a little bit. But if they're not, just remember you might have different responsibilities within each of these categories that we're about to go through. Okay, so I'm going to go through each of these legal categories, these legal topics, fairly quickly because I want to make sure I give everyone an opportunity to ask questions and to sort of open up the floor for discussion. But the 6 topics that you see in front of you are what I would consider to be the most foundational legal topics that you will need to navigate within the XR industry, and more specifically within healthcare XR. The first is privacy and security. This is probably applicable to everyone. There are absolutely privacy rules that apply whether you're in the entertainment industry, the healthcare industry, academics, whatever industry you might be in. There are Well, lots of different privacy and security rules. I know this is a global group as well, so I will also note that your geography and the geography of your users will be really important in understanding your privacy and security obligations. Some quick ones that you'll want to be thinking about are, first and foremost, your privacy policy. You need to inform your users what data you're collecting from them and what you're doing with that data. And remember, that is collecting from your users. So are they creating an account within your platform? And if so, what do you get with that account? Do you have their email address? Do you have their age? Do you have their date of birth? Do you have payment information from them, whether it's a credit card number or something else? What information are you collecting from your users? And then what are you doing with it? Are you sharing it with vendors that process payments for you? For example, if you're using Stripe or another third-party payment processor, you need to tell your users through your privacy policy that you're sharing their information with third-party vendors for purposes of processing payment, for example. So that's sort of to your user. Your privacy policy is going to sort of house all of your privacy practices and your really important communication with your users. Again, that's the case no matter where you are. If you're in Europe, GDPR requires you to have a privacy notice. That's going to do the same thing that a privacy policy, which I just mentioned, is going to do here in the US. And then, in the US and in the EU, I don't know all of the different countries outside of the EU and the US and what the rules are, but keep in mind that within the EU and the US, there are going to be state and territory level regulations as well. So under GDPR in the EU, there may be different member states that have their own rules that are stricter or more flexible than GDPR. And in the US, same thing. We have states that may have stricter rules than what the federal rules are. So for example, if you're in the US and a lot of your users are in California, you are going to have different rules to follow than someone whose user base is mostly in New York State, for example, surprisingly. So keep that in mind as well. While there are sort of general privacy mechanisms like GDPR that are going to apply across the board, there are also potentially going to be more specific rules and potentially stricter rules for you to follow based on more narrow geographic scope based on where your users are. So you need to have a privacy policy. Again, that's how you communicate to your users, what data you're collecting from them, and what you're doing with it. If you have customers that are different from your users, and this is really common in healthcare. In healthcare, it's really common to sell not directly to consumers, but to sell a product, to sell a software platform or a technology solution to healthcare providers or to other larger healthcare institutions like payers. So in that instance, your users are different than your customer. Your customers are also going to be very interested in what data you are collecting from their patrons that they're giving access to the software to. They're going to be very interested in what data you're collecting from their users and what you're doing with that data. So with your customers, you won't necessarily have a privacy policy that the customers sign, but you will have a contract that sort of does the same thing. It tells your customers what data you're collecting from their users and what you're doing with it. And it also tells your customers how you're hosting that data and what security practices you have in place to make sure that that data is protected. In the healthcare industry, a lot of times that language is going to be in a business associate agreement. That essentially is a agreement that binds your customer and you to comply with HIPAA, to make sure that if you have patient data that you are collecting and using, that you are using it in a safe way, and that you're only doing things with it that HIPAA allows you to do. So that's sort of privacy and security. Again, your users are going to get your privacy policy. Your customers are just going to look more closely at your customer agreement. They may also want to see your privacy policy, again, depending on what the relationship is. A really quick note that I mentioned briefly at the end of that there is security. So privacy and security are separate topics. They are, privacy is what you do with your data, what data you collect and what you do with it. Security is how you protect that data. Are you using two-factor authentication? Do you have a certain encryption in place? And are you encrypting data at rest and in motion, or just in motion? If you have an encrypted email server, is it a bidirectional encryption, or is it just outgoing emails that are encrypted? Your customers, much more so than your users, if you're in a B2B environment, your customers are going to be really interested in what security practices you have in place, and they may actually place very specific requirements on you. They may say, I don't care that you're an early stage company. I want you to get high trust certification or SOC 2 certification, or comply with these ISO standards from NIST. So that one, security, there's not actually in the US a very comprehensive legal set of rules around what security practices you have to have in place, but your customers will largely dictate that. All right, so that's privacy and security. The next topic that is really important to think about is FDA. This one's going to be more specific to the healthcare world and products that you're building within the healthcare industry, because that's kind of where the FDA regulations live. The FDA regulates medical devices and drugs. If you're building an XR platform, you're likely not building a pharmaceutical drug. So I'm going to talk a little bit about medical devices and what the FDA has to say about them. One really important thing to keep in mind, especially in the healthcare industry, is that software platforms can be considered medical devices under FDA regulations. So if your platform is making treatment recommendations to patients or telling patients how to take their medication or what medications to take, or if your software is diagnosing conditions, pulling in patient data and then recommending a diagnosis, that might be a medical device function. And that means that before you go to market, you have to go through an FDA process. That might be a 510K clearance process. That might be a de novo review process. It kind of depends on what your product does. But you're going to have to go through some hoops with the FDA before you can actually go to market and sell your product. That is super important in healthcare, because if you go to market, if you start advertising your product before you get that FDA clearance or approval, you could get in a lot of trouble. And the FDA does actually monitor this very closely. So it's really important to understand, as a threshold matter, is your software going to be considered a medical device? And if so, what does that mean for you? What do you have to do before you can go to market? There's a lot of nuance there, a lot of specifics, and I'm happy to kind of answer questions as you have them, but I don't want to spend too much time on that since we don't have that much time. But just sort of, suffice it to say, there are a lot of rules within the FDA's realm that may or may not apply to you, and you want to be careful of them. The third area that I will talk about is fraud and abuse. So fraud and abuse is another area that is very specific to healthcare. The reason that fraud and abuse is important in healthcare is because it has a major impact on your business model. There are very strict federal and state rules in the US that will tell you how you can and cannot charge your customers or your users, depending on what your product is. Most of those rules are concerned with you selling to healthcare providers and or interacting directly with patients. So if you are not selling to healthcare providers, maybe, for example, you are just direct to consumer and there's no insurance involved, then you don't necessarily need to worry too much about fraud and abuse. But if you are selling to healthcare providers or interacting directly with patients and there's insurance coverage involved, then you'll need to understand a couple of aspects of these rules. You'll need to understand the anti-kickback statute. You'll need to understand the federal Stark law, which is going to apply less often, but still really important. And you'll need to understand the False Claims Act. So there are a couple of others as well, but those are sort of the general categories. Fraud and abuse is one that trips up a lot of clients, particularly my clients that have already worked in industries outside of healthcare, because a lot of the business practices that are really important and make your business successful outside of healthcare, you can't actually do within the healthcare industry. So, for example, within the healthcare industry, if you are selling to healthcare providers, oftentimes you cannot have your healthcare provider customers pay you a percentage of the insurance reimbursement that they get for using your product. That would be fee splitting. It's a form of kickback. You are not allowed to require your customers or to charge your customers a percentage of the reimbursement they collect. There are some workarounds there that we can talk about in a minute, but that is one that trips people up a lot, because in other industries, it's really common. It's really common to, for example, pay salespeople a commission, pay salespeople a percentage of the size of a deal that they close. You can't actually do that, especially if the healthcare provider is billing insurance, because you would have to take a percentage of what they're getting from reimbursement to determine how much you pay them. That the size of the deal ends up being based on, a lot of times ends up being based on the percentage, the reimbursement that they collect. So that's a complex one, and there's a lot of nuance there as well. But I think, if there's one piece of information to take away from this presentation, it is that you probably cannot, or you should at least talk to a lawyer before you do, charge your healthcare provider customers a percentage of collections or a percentage of reimbursement that they get when using your product. Again, there are some pretty simple workarounds. This is, like I said, a very common issue that my clients face because it is a pretty blanket prohibition. So there are already some successful options out there that sort of make it work from the business perspective, but also keep you clear of those fraud and abuse rules. All right, I'm going to jump to reimbursement and just talk a little bit about reimbursement and why it's important. And I do see, Laura, your question regarding FDA in the chat, and I will answer that in 1 second. So reimbursement is essentially, do healthcare insurance payers cover your product or the services that your customers provide when you're providing the services that your customers provide when they're using your product. So reimbursement can be really important for expanding patient access to your technology. XR technology, headsets in particular, are pretty expensive. And there are patients that are not going to be able to afford that. However, if patients that have insurance coverage, if their insurance plans do cover your technology, whether it's the headset itself or some portion of it, or the software product, the software platform that it operates on the headset, that can ease that cost for the patient and help expand access. So reimbursement is also really important for determining what your customers are going to be able and willing to pay you. So if you are selling to healthcare providers and they do get reimbursed when using your product, they probably don't want to pay you more than what that reimbursement is. They probably want to pay you a percentage of what that reimbursement is. As we just talked about, you can't actually charge them a percentage, but you can calculate internally what half of that reimbursement will look like. So for example, if your provider is doing a telehealth visit in a headset using your platform and they get reimbursed $100 for that visit, you can charge them $50 for that visit for the cost of the technology that you've provided to them, for example. And so reimbursement will impact, again, how you charge your customers and what they can afford to pay you. So again, determining your fee structure and how much you charge, and making sure that patients actually can access your technology are two of the reasons why I think reimbursement is really important in healthcare to understand. And there actually are a number of CPT codes, a number of reimbursement options for XR technology specifically. So that's a growing and evolving space, but there are some options out there already. Intellectual property. This is one that's going to be applicable to everyone, regardless of whether you're in healthcare or not. There are two primary areas of IP that you'll want to be thinking about. The first is patents. Is your technology patentable, whether it's an algorithm that you're building, a product that you're building, or a process that you're using to come up with a certain type of recommendation? For example, AI, sometimes AI platforms or large language models would be eligible for a patent, likely a process patent, depending on what it is that they're building. And so there's patent and trademark. Patent is going to be specific to your product. Trademark is specific to your brand. So if you want protection for both your product and your brand, you would likely trademark your brand and any fun slogans that you use, and patent your product. I am not a patent attorney. My firm does not file patents. So I will also say that if you do believe your product is patentable, or if you want to figure out if your product is patentable, you will want to find an attorney that understands your space specifically. Most patent attorneys, if not all of them, are required to have a background in science. So a lot of patent attorneys are engineers or medical professionals, or have some background in one of the sciences, math, for example. That will be really important for making sure that they draft your patent documents appropriately to adequately protect you. On the trademark side, my firm does do that. We do that a lot. That's actually a really interesting way to protect your company before your product is even ready, because then you can go out and start using your brand before your product is ready, and you've already got the name recognition and it's already protected. So if someone else wants to use the same name, they can't, even if they have, a similar product or their product is ready before yours is. So trademark is also really important, especially when you're building a national company. You may have an entity name that gets approved in your state. For example, if you create a Delaware corporation, you may be fine in Delaware, but in California, the name of your entity may not be available. So you'll want to do a national trademark search, figure out what name or names are allowed, and then use those across the country so that in California, no one can create an entity that uses your name or use your name in their advertising. So that's sort of a brief intellectual property. And then lastly, I will very briefly talk about state rules. I already mentioned state-based rules within privacy. There are lots of other areas of rules where the state can be more strict or different than what federal rules we have in place. So, for example, when we're talking about privacy, I mentioned the privacy policy. The Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, will tell you that you have to have a privacy policy and what goes into that privacy policy. But there are also states that will require you to add additional language to your privacy policy. So there are state-based privacy rules that are stricter than federal rules. And then there are some categories of state rules where there actually aren't any federal rules. And this is really important, again, for building a business that is scalable across the US, because there is no federal law to tell you what's allowed in every state. For example, yes, California is very strict when it comes to privacy. So for example, licensure. There's no federal rule that says what state or states a physician has to be licensed in. Every state makes their own rules on that. Same thing is true for clinical staff, like nurses, medical assistants, NPs. And that's important because if you're selling into a healthcare environment, sometimes, depending on what your business model is, you may also be providing services in addition to your software. And if those services are provided by licensed clinical staff, like nurses, you would need to make sure that your nurses comply with the state rules where the users are located. That's another area where your customer and your user can have different rules or can carry different responsibilities. You may have a customer that's based in California that provides telehealth services to patients around the country. So if your customer is located in California, but the patients they serve, or they have patients in Virginia, your nurses will need to be licensed in Virginia because it's based on where the patient is located. So licensure rules vary a lot from state to state. There's another area called corporate practice of medicine that essentially governs who can and cannot own a business that provides clinical services to patients, whether it's medical services or therapy services or any professional service that requires a license. Us lawyers even have to deal with it in some states. That's going to be really important for determining your corporate structure and your overall business model. And again, that's an area where there is no federal law. So you have to go state by state. You have to understand the general landscape to make sure that whatever you're building will not stop you from working with customers or users in a particular state. Scope of practice, the rules that dictate what doctors can and can't do, what nurses can and can't do, sort of similar to licensure, but slightly different. That's also important to understand. You'll want to understand who can use your platform and what can they do with it so that you don't build a product that your customers can't actually use, for example. There are a bunch of other state rules, but those are the ones that come up the most in healthcare, and those are the ones that I work with my clients on most often. The last area that I wanted to touch on that is not on this slide, but is important across the board, so to anyone in XR, not just healthcare, is accessibility, particularly if you are government contracting. So accessibility right now is sort of an interesting question within XR because there are rules that require your website, for example, to be accessible by people with visual impairment and hearing impairment, visual and hearing impairments. That can be difficult to build in XR, where sometimes that visual aspect is actually necessary for the product to function. So I don't have any recommendations for you yet because those laws are evolving, but I do just want to sort of highlight it as one area where, again, no matter what industry or what space you're building in within XR, that's going to be an interesting area that I think is going to evolve over the next couple of years and that we're all going to want to pay close attention to. Yes, the federal government has to be Section 508 accessible. So if you're contracting with the VA or any other federal agency, you will have to comply with Section 508, which is a federal rule about, a set of federal rules about accessibility. And I'm happy to sort of talk about those offline. Molly, it sounds like you already have a good understanding of those. So it sounds like maybe Molly can answer questions there as well. Yeah, some universities and colleges as well, for sure. All right, so we only have 12 minutes left. I do have one more slide, but it might be a little bit too much because I want to make sure I answer questions. So if you want to take a quick screenshot or picture of this slide, please go ahead and feel free to ask questions. This slide is just a diagram of what I see as the most common B2B business model within the healthcare industry for XR companies. So the XR company will sell technology and services to healthcare providers who use that technology to provide telehealth or remote monitoring or other types of healthcare services to patients. The healthcare provider will bill the insurance payer for that service, for the telehealth visit, for the remote monitoring, whatever it might be, and then pay a services fee back to the XR company. So it's kind of like a B2B2C where there's that hospital or health system between the XR company and the patient, but the XR company is usually still building that product for both those provider users and those patient users. So again, hopefully that is straightforward, but if it's not, please feel free to take a picture and ask questions after. I'm happy to answer them. All right, I'm going quite fast, but hopefully I am making sense. So there are some questions in the chat, which I will go ahead and address. And if you're the one that asked the question, you want to unmute yourself and clarify anything, that is helpful as well. So first from Laura, Laura says, regarding FDA, many believe that mental health is a gray zone or not covered by FDA. Can you provide some general guidance on that? Yeah, it's a great question. So mental health in particular is a tough one because mental health as a colloquial term can mean a lot of things. It can encompass wellness, for example. It can encompass types of activities that are not, by the FDA anyway, considered to be clinical in nature, or there are certain conditions like stress, for example, that XR products or other software products might be built to help address. You might have an XR platform that is built to help patients or help people manage stress. As far as the FDA is concerned, stress is not a medical condition, so that actually wouldn't be a medical device. But if you were to change that and say, instead of stress, you're helping people manage anxiety, anxiety is a diagnosis that the FDA cares about. And so that platform might be a medical device. So it is definitely a gray zone. It very much comes down to how you're talking about your product and what specifically your product is intended to do. But yeah, it's not as easy to say within the mental health space whether something is or isn't a medical device until you look really closely at the guidance that the FDA has published.
I have a
Does that
quick
answer your question, Laura?
I have a quick follow-up.
Sure.
You said it right there. It depends on how people talk about their products, and I've heard a lot of behind the scenes talk along those lines. Don't say the word anxiety because we can't be treating that. So that implies that it's all determined by what the company says about itself, and that the FDA, if they looked at it, that they're just going to look at those words and they're not looking deeper. Is that really true?
So it's a good question. So the definition of a medical device under the FDA regulations is primarily based on the intended use of a product. But when determining the intended use of a product, yes, the first place the FDA is going to look is at your marketing and advertising language. What are you saying about your product? What are you putting on your website? What are you telling people that your product does? However, the FDA will also look at what is happening in practice as evidence of an intended use, particularly if how your product is being used in practice is so obvious that you as the manufacturer should have known about it. So to give sort of a concrete example, if you say on your website that your product is intended to be used for managing stress, but you're actually selling to healthcare providers, to therapists, for example. And when you're talking to the therapist, you're saying, you can use this to manage anxiety. And then the therapists are using it to manage their patient's anxiety. That would probably be a situation where even though your marketing language and what you've said out loud to the public about your platform doesn't implicate that FDA definition, you're so aware of what's actually happening with it that you should have known one of the intended uses was managing anxiety, and therefore you should have gone through the FDA clearance process. Therefore, it is a medical device. So you still have to be careful about what's happening in practice with that device as well, with that platform as well.
Thank you. That is so very helpful. I've heard so many conversations of this nature. So thank you so much for that guidance.
Yeah, of course. Okay, Sarah Barker asked, under privacy, do researchers use quantitative study builders like Prolific need to share with their participants Prolific's privacy laws? Makes sense. If it's too specific, no need to address. So I am not familiar with Prolific, but the general, I think my response is, if you have a privacy policy and you have a vendor that is doing something with data for a specific purpose, you don't have to necessarily tell the user about that third party's privacy rules. But if there is something within your product that operates on that third party's platform, so like, for example, some XR platforms will integrate with an EHR to do a telehealth visit. If you're integrating in a way that technology is actually operating within your platform, then yes, you would link to that third party's privacy policy in your privacy policy. You would say, there are portions of this platform that may be provided by third parties, and those are subject to the third party's privacy rules. For example, we use Prolific, here's their privacy policy. Does that, like I said, I'm not familiar with Prolific, so if that doesn't answer your question, let me know.
No, Kelly, that's great. And I'll just say really quick, if I could just ask really quickly. So for instance, if I was doing my protocol in the Engage XR platform, I would need to say in my research that, you're downloading it and they have this is their privacy stuff. Am I getting the essence of what you're saying there? Like anything that I'm using that has a privacy policy, I should address it.
Yeah.
right?
So generally,
I don't want to
yes.
take up too much time. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So, and we can talk about it offline too, but I think the answer is probably, although research is actually slightly different as well, especially if you're working with like an IRB or something. In general, though, it's a good idea to understand what those privacy rules say so that you're not doing anything that you shouldn't be, and so that the users are clear.
It's a lot.
Yeah. Okay, Robin, I've been through FDA approvals for medical devices. Where can we find guidance on how much help we can give without putting the study at risk? Yeah, so this one is tough too. Honestly, studies are challenging because for me to give an answer now because they're so different. Each study is unique and has its own, a lot of times has its own consent processes, its own privacy practices that do or do not apply. So is your question, Robin, about like if you're helping a customer conduct a study, you need tech people to provide tech support to the patient?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just, their headsets, it's unfamiliar tech. Their tech people on the ground don't know what's going on. And so my expectation, especially with the history there, is that I would be able to come in and say like, oh yeah, you just restart this, or oh yeah, here's the controllers and here's how you do this thing. But we have gotten the like brick wall on that, and it surprises me because of the history that I have that, man, we had people like standing in the operating room back in the day. So if that's still a thing and it's really just about the nuances of the way the study is written, then I just need to be more cognizant of that when it's written up. Sounds like maybe you're saying.
Yeah, that's interesting. That it might be that because like the closest example I can think of is I have clients that have software platforms that like pharma companies, for example, have used in their studies, and they provide tech support during those studies. Like they work with
Right, because you have to, right? You have to. How
Yeah.
else are you going to get it done?
Yeah,
Interesting.
exactly. Yeah, so that may be specific to a particular study.
Yeah, or probably the knowledge base too, the person who was telling me this information as I'm like, I don't know how you expect to complete this if you don't have any help. Okay.
Yes, that is also very possible. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Okay. I do see that Grace has a comment. If I could just jump quickly to Melissa's question, and then Grace, if you can comment on the veteran perspective, because I think that's really important as well. Okay, question about biometrics. Eye tracking, motion capture, facial recognition. Very recently, Meta was fined a few $1 billion for violating Texas biometrics regs. Pretty low bar for them, to be clear. They failed to inform users and gain consent for facial recognition, but not every state. Yes. Okay. General guidelines to adhere to when building software. Yeah. Okay. So this is a great point. Biometrics in particular are another area where it sort of falls under privacy, but it's a specific area of privacy that some states have specific rules about. The most common law, or the most well-known law, is BIPA. It's Indiana, I believe, or Illinois. That is a rule that specifically talks about collecting and using biometric identifiers from patients or from users. Fingerprint, facial recognition, eye tracking, I think could be, motion capture could be. Some of those are going to depend on how the state defines biometric. But when you are collecting data that is an identifier that identifies a particular person, for example, facial recognition, if you've got someone's face saved in your software in such a way that your software could look at another picture of them and recognize that person, or somehow, using fingerprint, same thing. There are very specific rules about collecting and using that biometric data because it is extra sensitive. So in general, my recommendation tends to be, yes, comply with the most restrictive state and build around that. Now, in some cases, there will be states that are just too restrictive that it's not practical to build a model around it. And this happens in healthcare a lot as well, particularly as rules kind of grow and change and evolve over time. So I would say, in the US, yes, I would look to the most strict. And then, yeah, BIPA also has a private individual cause of action, which like HIPAA doesn't have. I think maybe CCPA does. But yeah, that's important too, because if you violate that rule, then individual users can sue you. Whereas for HIPAA, for example, individual patients can't sue you, only the doctors, or well, the government can. The doctors can sue you, I guess, under the contract. So yeah, I when there are situations where laws vary from state to state, my recommendation typically is let's figure out what the strictest is and build around that. The last thing I'll say about that is particularly in areas like biometric identification, you also just want to make sure that you or your lawyer, whoever, is paying very close attention to changes that happen over time, because tomorrow, like today, the strictest state might be Texas or Illinois, and tomorrow it could be a different state. So you also just want to make sure that you're paying attention to the changes that are out there and that you're continuously evolving to stay compliant. Okay, so Grace, I skipped over you before. Grace said, I don't have a question. I would like to comment on healthcare and veteran population perspective. So Grace, do you want to unmute yourself and comment? If you're still here.
I don't know if Grace is still with us. Grace, if you still are here, go ahead and send us in the chat. Otherwise, we can move to another question or a comment. Oh, there's Grace. Grace, I'm going to unmute you, so if you have a comment. Oh, you're good.
Yeah, sorry. I don't know what happened, but I'm back. I thank you for today. But you made a valid point before when you started talking about in the veteran area. As we all know, the VA is moving along with in the veteran population, getting heads and headsets, and it is all differently regulated, this, that, and the other. And for me, from my perspective, I'm glad I'm learning here today to understand all these regulations for other different states on the private sector. And I wanna bring up a good point from a private perspective for myself personally, what I'm up against in Connecticut. So as you all know, I am the veteran, and also there are some few that know personally. I fit all this criteria from a veteran's benefit, uh, from a veteran's side of I don't know what happened. I'm sorry. But it's a slow moving process with things. Now, I also, part of my other piece is I also have, I got injured at a young age, and I have private health insurance, the Medicare, full Medicare. But where I live here in Connecticut, I can't, there's nobody from the perspective of, from a medical perspective for that, will come into Connecticut for services. One example would be I've been on the wait list with at when before it was called XR Health. It was through Amelia, because they don't come into Connecticut for, say, let's just say under mental health. Okay. So that's for any of you people that are doing, let's say, to do work, and you want to try to enter into So, because Connecticut is a very large population of veterans, okay, and it is still slow moving with the rollout of trying to get heads and headsets here, okay. But there's also a lot of veterans that have the Medicare, so it's kind of like a stuck. It's still a stuck state. Uh, so where I also want to go with something like this would be how can maybe how can something like this can make better, uh, because all it would take really would be one individual. Because see, with changing times now that the technology is, the data's all there and proven with the medical and this and that, to start maybe talking to, like, because it is being approved with the Medicare on certain, because for me, my medical criteria, I fit all of the aspects of all the medical, this, that, and the other for all kinds of prescriptions. Okay, but um, uh, uh, it would have to get all approved. So I hope I'm making some sort of sense, because I've been a few years in the waiting period for this sort of stuff to happen, and I'm very patient, and this is why I strongly support and advocate well for this to still try to happen. Well, it is happening, but more so here in my state of Connecticut.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I hear that a lot. Part of it is those state differences and rules that I mentioned when it comes to like corporate practice and what you can and can't do in certain states. And then some of it is also just based on like the VA itself. The VA is doing amazing things, but they are a massive organization. So sometimes they, unfortunately, move a little bit slower than we'd like them to. But yeah, it's tough. And then, yeah, Jenna made a great point in the chat too. Reimbursement is a really big one because Medicaid is state-based as well. So Medicaid reimbursement for certain products and services will differ from state to state. And then commercial insurers will also often differ from state to state or geography to geography. So yeah, for sure, there's still a lot of work to be done to make sure that everyone has access everywhere. That is always the goal. And yeah, my hope would be that, we see that change big time in the next couple of years.
Oh yeah, and I want to just lastly comment, the Department of Veterans Affairs presently is working utilizing through me.
Awesome.
With getting stuff started, not just for me, but for a lot of services for outpatient veterans.
Awesome. That's great. Love that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Okay, I've got about 2 more minutes. If anybody has any last minute questions that they want to ask, or if you just want to email me, my email address and our website is on the screen. Please feel free to just shoot me an email, and I'm happy to, find time to talk through any questions you may have. Okay. Well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. Like I said, I've been inspired by XR Women since I met Jenna, really, but and then again when I saw you all at AWE. So thank you so much. Please stay in touch, and I hope that we all get to connect again soon.
Thank you so much, Kaitlyn, for coming out today. This was a huge. Hold on. All right, my microphone's on now. This was a huge knowledge bubble for us, and so I know that I'm going to go back and take your presentation and start picking it apart again, Kaitlyn. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So for any of you, so we're going to close out our official meeting today. If any of you want to stick around and keep talking about this or share resources, I also saw in the presentation specifically, Grace, it sounds like there are 1 or 2 women who would like to connect with you. You're welcome to stay here, but this is the end of this August 7th, XR Women Wednesday. Thank you again so much, Kaitlyn. So anybody who wants to keep talking, you can go ahead and unmute your mic, and we'll go into the